Everybody ready? Ready?
Yeah.
All right, listen.
It's your weekend show.
Quiet, numbskulls, I'm broadcasting.
With Bob Biermann.
It's great.
And welcome to your weekend show. I'm your host, Bob Biermann. So glad you're taking some time from your busy weekend schedule to spend it with me. As many of you that listen to the program on a regular basis, especially over the last several years, you probably have figured out that my wife and I divide our time between two locations. We have a home on the coast, the east coast of Florida, in a community called Port St. Lucie, which is about 45 minutes north of Palm Beach. And during that time, I spent a lot of time over at WRMI Radio, which is in Okeechobee, Florida. It's about an hour drive from our home. And we spend the rest of our time at a place we purchased a year ago up in the mountains of northeast Georgia, near Clayton, Georgia, in a community called Sky Valley. We have the opportunity of buying very inexpensively this rather large, about 1,700 square foot condominium. It is a 3-level chalet-type condominium that needed extensive renovation. We were able to get it really very inexpensively. And we have spent the last, 9 months in renovating that place. Not every day. We started with a goal last summer when we began in August to have it ready by winter to be inhabitable at least. So the main floor got done and the loft area. And now our attention for this summer is going to be turning toward a new deck and finishing out the lower floor with a master bedroom suite and a couple of other rooms, actually including an office and studio for a lot of the work that I do for recording. So I will have a place to record this program in the not-too-distant future when we are up in the mountains of Georgia. I'm at a point in life, as probably some of you are, that I am, retired, actually more like semi-retired. There's still so many things in life that I want to really take the time to accomplish and do. Maybe you can identify with that. I'm going to be 64 years old this year, and I feel blessed that I was actually able to, quote, retire from a single full-time job a while back. And it's opened up a number of doors for things that have been on the back of my mind and on my heart to do, both in broadcast and in ministry, that had I been working just a single regular job, I may have never had the time to do. And I believe a lot of the work that I do now is rewarding. It's not so much rewarding monetarily. It doesn't need to be. Right now, these are the things that you aspire to do, things that you want to do, things that, can benefit other people. It's not just this radio show. It's like I talked about last weekend, this project called Ancient Word Radio that means a lot to me. Will it be some great online radio service with millions of listeners? Probably not. But there'll be a niche audience around the world that this facility can serve. And I plan on working on a couple of other ventures like that along the way as well. And spend a little bit of time when I'm in Florida here at WRMI. In fact, I'm recording this particular program at the studios of WRMI. I'm doing some engineering work today here at the facility and kind of getting ready for the worst that summer can bring in thunderstorms by having some equipment tested and some backup equipment ready, which is just part of the day-to-day life of a shortwave radio station, especially in Florida, where you're prone to have thunderstorms. We are the lightning capital of North America here in Florida. And also the potential that we could see a hurricane. You never know. Some years we do, some years we don't, but you never take it for granted that a hurricane or something that can upset the apple cart and change your life could come into your life. And so when you live in Florida, you learn to be kind of prepared and ready. You have certain important papers put in and like a lockbox you can grab quickly if you have to evacuate. We are always ready to leave and being prepared, and I spent some time toward the end of my broadcast career. I left radio technically for about 5 years and worked in emergency management and communications, primarily in information, education, and public media. And I learned a lot about being prepared and what it takes, and I apply those lessons learned in that little part of my career to my life today, especially living in Florida. Of course, the mountains of northeast Georgia have their perils as well. There could be tornadoes during the springtime, and you could get snow and ice during the winter, and even a few major thunderstorms could roll through, and I've seen flooding in that part of the world. There's really no place that I can think of off the top of my head that doesn't have its own share of risk and challenges and things you got to be ready for. I don't care where you live. You could live in the desert. You could live in upstate New York. You could live in Texas. You could live in California. You could live in Hawaii. And, of course, they're dealing with things in Hawaii now that I don't think a year or so ago they anticipated dealing with. It's the world we live in. It's always a world of constant change. And the wise person is prepared. You can't prepare for everything, but you need to be prepared for the things you can be prepared for. It's hard to live for the moment. A lot of people today tend to just live in the moment. They don't think about the consequence of their actions today, what it may mean next week or next year in their life. And a lot of people that live in the moment will share later in life the many regrets they had of the opportunities missed because they were so determined for just that moment and not the long term and thinking it through. A lot of young people today have a hard time grasping what it means to get out in life. Somewhere along the way, we've changed the way we look at life and the way we've raised our kids, and I think a lot of it goes back even to my generation and the generation or so before me. I look at my father. I mentioned this not long ago. He came up born just prior to the Great Depression. He grew up during the Depression, and as the Great Depression comes to an end, he ends up serving in the Marines in World War II. And a lot of the greatest generation share similar stories. Those that did not serve in war, those that were either too old or didn't have health good enough to be able to serve, or they were too young, they will share with you the anticipation and concern they had, would we win this war? Many people never thought it was a given that we would win a war on two fronts, in Europe and in the Pacific. I remember talking to both sets of my grandparents way back when, and they would share what it was like to be an air raid warden in Long Island. And they would tell me about what it was like wondering if you'd ever get through this war and who would win. My grandparents had a successful business they had to shut down for the duration, and both of them worked in a Sperry plant. They were too old to serve in the war. My dad served, and they worked in a Sperry plant making gyroscopes for aircraft and other things. It was vital to the war effort. And they will share that in those early days in 1942 and 1943, you had to wonder how we would make out. We were beginning to make some headway in the Pacific and made some headway coming across Italy into Europe. But could we take on the Axis armies and navies and their air power? Would it be even feasible to win in such an environment of having a war on two different fronts and dividing things so much? I listen to a lot of old-time radio when I travel. Like I said, when I have to come to WRMI, where I'm at today, it's about an hour drive. And one of the little luxuries that I do afford myself, I have satellite radio, and I listen to music sometimes, listen to news quite a bit. And every once in a while, I'll put on old-time golden age of radio, which features programs from the late 30s, a lot of them in the 40s and into the early 50s. And many of the programs were recorded during the Second World War, trying to keep the folks at home entertained and give them a break from their work and their monotony and their concern. But in many of those programs, you will hear announcements talking about, saving money, saving resources, even saving grease, from your frying pan to be used to make medicine. It was that much of a concern. You just couldn't go out and buy a set of tires. Rubber and nylon and things of that nature were in extreme short supply. Meat was a hard-to-find commodity, and you were given rationing coupons for the things you could buy during the time of World War II. It took literally until June of 1944 before the tide really began to turn in Europe. The invasion of Europe on D-Day, which is one of those things you know about when you go to school, but I think we're forgetting about today. I think we're losing a lot of our history, and a lot of our young people today are not grounded in our history. And there's an old saying, if you are not a student of history, you are doomed to repeat it. And I look at kids today that couldn't even tell you who was fighting in World War II. Forget about World War I. There are a lot of kids today in their late teens and 20s in college that cannot even tell you who fought in the Civil War or who fought in the Revolutionary War. They don't even have that understanding of history at all, of how the United States ever became a nation and why, and the good and the bad, the things that this nation has overcome and the things that the United States stands for. They just don't understand because, well, they're not being taught anymore. We talk about the devices that they use and the games that they play and the social media they're addicted to. But along the way, they're not getting any grounding in anything of any substance, like history. The education is lacking. And commitment, something we talked about not that many weeks ago on this program. Commitment is also lacking. It goes back to what I said at the beginning of the program. The number of people that literally live for the moment and never think of the consequences across time. Now, all of us make those mistakes. I've made those mistakes in my life, especially in my younger years. You see that new car you want to buy. Can you really afford it? And then after you've been making payments on it for about a year, you begin to wonder, did I make the right decision? All of a sudden, that car you had that was paid for, man, it starts looking a whole lot better. But that's part of the learning lesson of life, to learn the discipline of the things you have to do. A lot of young people today are having a hard time making that transition from living at home to becoming responsible adults and parents and productive people in their society. And it's not a bad thing because, you should take pride in the things that you do. I try to take pride in the work that I do. Am I the most talented person in the world? No. But I try to use the talents that I have the best that I can for a good and wholesome purpose. And I enjoy the time that I'm away from work, what little time sometimes it appears to be. I really do enjoy life. And I'm enjoying it more in my 60s than I ever thought that I would. And I think back when I was in my 20s, I thought being 60 was just, old and decrepit. And I'm learning, well, yeah, it's old, and you're not as healthy and you're not as strong as you were maybe in your 20s and 30s. But you've learned a lot along the way, and you have a lot to share, and there's a lot of things that you still want to get accomplished. And I'm thankful beyond words that I'm in an environment now where those things that I've dreamt about doing 5 and 10 years ago, or even 15 or 20 years ago, I'm able to do today now, and I'm so excited for what the future holds. I really am. I'm really excited about the good things that are happening in the work that I'm doing. Like I say, the little radio project, Ancient Word Radio. You can find out more at ancientwordradio.com or ancientwordradio.org. They both go to the same location. Developing this online little radio station, a very traditional Christian music and message, and it empowers and it encourages a lot of people, and this is the only reason I did it. Like I say, it's not to get rich. It's just one of those things that now that I do have the time, where I can give my time to do something of that nature, I truly want to do it. And I am. And I'm beginning to see the results. And I'm going to be sharing more about that as the days and weeks go by. To this medium that I spend part of my year in when I'm in Florida, shortwave. A lot of people say it's like AM radio. It's a dying entity. Who listens? And there's truth in that. The shortwave audience is not what it was 30 years ago, anywhere in the world. But I also recognize that there are still many places in this world where what you can get on conventional radio, AM or FM, is very controlled. Or like in the United States, you may have limited choices because of corporate ownership, and you get the same stuff pretty much from most every radio station. As far as internet broadcasting, here's the good and the bad. The good is it's easy to get started. It's not inexpensive by any stretch of the imagination, contrary to popular belief, if you're doing it right. And your audience is not going to be massive, unless you happen to be a Spotify or a Pandora, which both are still losing money. And you wonder how long before there's a paywall to really keep that content alive. I'm not trying to talk down internet radio, but there's another problem. There are so many parts of the world that do not have this unlimited high-speed internet access. And if they do have internet access in many nations, the content you are allowed to see, hear, and view and read is oftentimes filtered and controlled. There's nothing, technically, that could stop the same from happening anywhere in the Western world. You know, what a government may deem, and they will use all the typical buzzwords like a hate group, can be banished from Facebook, can be banished from YouTube and other platforms. And websites, sometimes the host provider will knock them off because they disagree with the content. And that's what happens in the Western world. And when you have content that's considered hateful, I think the day is going to come that even in the United States and Canada, and definitely Europe and the United Kingdom, that there'll be content restrictions on the things you can post and use and do on the internet. And there are those people that oppose any kind of a conservative or religious value, and they may decide that the things I talk about are things you don't need to be hearing about because it goes contrary to the new social justice warrior syndrome that we see in the world today, and you wouldn't be able to hear this program online. You know, there are nations I know right now that if you wanted to hear this program, it is available online from several sources. If you wanted to hear this program, you couldn't. It would be filtered and blocked because of the nature and the content of the program. The program is not obscene. The program tries not to be political. The program tries to be pragmatic, and from time to time, I do talk about spiritual things. And that may, at some point, be considered hate speech. And there's where shortwave radio still has an edge, because shortwave radio has this incredible ability to go right across international borders. I want to take just a couple of moments to tell you about this facility here that I'm at today, WRMI. You know, we don't have a big studio here. Primarily, this is a transmission plant. It is here that we house the 14 broadcast transmitters, and outside the 23 different antenna systems that can beam signals virtually over the entire world. I get reports all the time just from this program, not just the United States, but Canada, South America, the United Kingdom, Europe. And even from time to time, I've been heard on this program in Japan. And then, of course, we also share this program, and we are so thankful to the Voice of Hope that provides a platform for this program to air on their 2 frequencies and transmitters, broadcasting from Zambia. And I recently had some wonderful correspondence from people that listen to your weekend show on the continent of Africa, which is a massive continent. You know, it's not a country. A lot of people don't think about this. It is huge. It is vastly bigger than the United States. You can fit a number of United States in the continent of Africa, a number of them. It is a massive continent. And this facility, the Voice of Hope, covers about 2/3 of it. Literally 2/3 of that continent have an excellent signal from South Africa up to the northwestern part of the continent. Of course, the central part is well covered. And so we're thankful for the opportunity of the billions of people that can theoretically hear this program. And shortwave is still a very viable option in many parts of that continent. Shortwave is a very viable method of communication to places like, well, I'll be honest, North Korea and China and Cuba, where certain things are still filtered and controlled, even parts of South America. And so what I'm saying is this opportunity to use shortwave radio is huge. And that's why I still spend a little bit of time and help out as best that I can the facility here at WRMI. And so that's where I want to start the program today. Like I say, I was driving here, and I want to share just a couple of thoughts in just a few minutes. Driving here today and thinking about what could I talk about today on the program. I really hadn't had the time in the first part of this week to really draw out a plan. And I was thinking, you know, do I pick up and talk more about what we talked about last weekend, get back to Ancient Word Radio, or go on to a different topic? We've talked about so many things in just this calendar year, and I was trying to find a different direction for the program. And I'm thinking, in my mind, I'm going to kind of revisit a theme, so to speak, but in a different direction. As I said before, when I come to WRMI, it's about an hour drive from the house, and it's not a lot of traffic lights. When you come here, you get on the Florida Turnpike for one exit, and then you are heading out into the country on 2-lane roads, and all you see, as far as the eye can see, are orange groves, farms, and cattle. That's pretty much it all the way until you arrive here at this facility, and we stick out like a sore thumb because there's nothing like it around us. The nearest building to us is a large produce storage facility just down the street about a mile away, and then the next building is miles beyond it, so it's a long drive. And quite often, just to do something a little bit different, I'll put on old-time radio, and it's almost like stepping back in time, especially when you hear some of the old commercials and the way radio was done back in the late 30s and the 40s in particular, and even the 1950s. And this was really theater of the mind. And that's something else that's in the back of my mind to kind of resurrect. And I've thought about this project, and whether it'll launch or not, I don't know. There's one thing I've thought about doing is to bring back some of the mindset of old-time radio. In other words, you know, to do drama where you are theater of the mind. I know that when I'm driving in the car, it makes the miles go by so much faster to listen to some of those old radio programs like yours truly, Johnny Dollar, the insurance investigator, or one that was popular on the West Coast for many, many, many years, The Whistler. And then the comedy programs, you know, with Jack Benny. And I've come to really appreciate the talent, the effort, and the limited technology compared to today of what they use to create the sound effects and put it all together, quite often in a live program setting, though it was transcribed to play back for different time zones. It's an incredible amount of work. And I find myself drawn to listening to radio drama, especially when I'm driving. You can't watch TV, but it certainly makes the miles just go by so much faster and so much easier. And I wonder when you look at shortwave and even the internet, is there a purpose for even that type of radio? These are the things that, as I go into this semi-retirement, I can now do. I'm looking at working with an individual on building a facility on the east coast of Florida, inland sufficiently to stay away from storm surge, a hardened communications complex that would be housing servers, and it would be a tower site and satellite dishes that could survive the bad weather and be a data center. And those are things that I'm going to be probably doing a little bit of work with as well. And of course, as many of you probably know, my ministry work. That's becoming increasingly huge on my heart and mind to get back to that part of my life in a larger way than I have in a number of years. Now, whether I'll actually pastor a church on a full-time basis again, I don't know if I ever will. But in the kind of work that I do in helping to plant churches and grow them and establish them, yeah, I'd like to give a good portion of my time in doing that. I'm saying a lot of this. It's kind of all disjointed, I know, just to kind of give you an idea of where life is going for me and our family right now. I'm excited at all the opportunities that I have in front of me, and my only hope and prayer is that I do all that I can do and do the best that I can do in these endeavors. I can tell you that I've had a lot of jobs in my life. Some were just jobs. That's what they were. They were work that needed to be done for an employer, and I did it and got paid for it. Then I've had some jobs that not only did they pay, but there was also a tremendous reward in the work that I did for other people. And you came home in the afternoon satisfied and content in the life that you're living. I hope maybe you are in a place where you're thinking that, well, I'm going to retire soon and I wonder what I'm going to do. Well, don't sit around. That's number one. Yeah, you don't have to get up. But I find myself still getting up in the morning early. I could sleep in till 9 or 10, but I don't. I could stay up till midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning. Sometimes I do, but I still tend to get up, and I want to do things during the course of the day that have purpose. Purpose. One of the most important things we as human beings need is purpose. There's nothing worse than somebody that feels like their life, the best of their life, is behind them. And I know people in their 70s, I know people in their 80s that are still accomplishing more things today than most young people did when I was a young guy. And I admire them. And I want to follow in their footsteps as well. I want to be considered productive in doing something when I'm in my 70s and 80s. I don't want to be just sitting up there in the mountains during the summertime enjoying the weather, and maybe I don't even golf. So I live near a golf course there, right on it, and I don't golf. I just don't want to sit around and watch TV. I want to do something productive with my life. And I hope you want to do something productive with yours as well. We have been talking for longer than I expected in this first segment. We are way, way over. I want to remind you, you're listening to Your Weekend Show. I'm your host, Bob Biermann. This is Your Weekend Show, heard on international shortwave, online, and domestic radio as well. And we are thankful for all the opportunities we have to be heard around the world. I want to thank you for listening. If you have been listening or a new listener, we do have a website. It is yourweekendshow.com. That is yourweekendshow.com. And we also maintain a Facebook presence. If you go to Facebook, just look up Your Weekend Show. And you can even make it one word. It pops right up, Your Weekend Show. And you can find out the latest and when the new programs are posted as well. And I would love to hear from you if you're listening to the program. If you've been listening for a while, maybe this is the week that you'll take the time to let me know that you're listening to Your Weekend Show. You can send an email right from there. Or if you prefer, I'll make it real easy. If you want to open up your email right now, just send an email to bob@yourweekendshow.com. That's bob@yourweekendshow.com. And trust me, that email comes directly to me and nobody else. So you can share your thoughts about the program directly with me. And that is bob@yourweekendshow.com. Right now, we need to take a break. And when we come back, we'll change direction just a little bit. This is your weekend show, and I'm your host, Bob Biermann.
In today's world, sharing the gospel is getting harder and harder. Being able to learn God's word to be able to minister or share the good news is also becoming more difficult. If you know you have a call on your life and are seeking to get the needed education and preparation for ministry, why not look into the Trinity Graduate School and Seminary? Trinity Graduate School and Seminary exists to glorify Jesus Christ as Lord by preparing adults to evangelize, disciple, and minister to the world. Since 1973, Trinity Graduate School and Seminary has fulfilled its mission of preparing men and women for ministry. Trinity Graduate School and Seminary is accessible to students around the world through an online delivery system. To find out more information, why not visit their website at trinitygraduate.com. That's trinitygraduate.com.
Welcome to It's Your Weekend Show with Bob Biermann.
And welcome back to your weekend show. I'm your host, Bob Biermann. So glad you're listening today on shortwave online. Let me know you're listening by going to the website yourweekendshow.com. That is yourweekendshow.com. Here's Chicago. So from 1975 and old days here on your weekend show, I'm your host, Bob Biermann. I remember that song playing it as a young disc jockey on the radio. I've been in radio at that time for about 4 years, I guess. And it's funny, when you're at that point in life in your 20s and you look at the window of life you're living in, I thought radio the way it was then would last, for a lifetime. I really thought that I would be just a happy disc jockey until the day that I retired. I really believed that. I thought maybe I'd change formats down the road, but I really thought that radio, the way that I knew it, with live announcers, radio stations all across the United States, let alone the world, I thought radio would be my career just as an announcer. But it's funny how time and technology change. When I started in radio back in 1971, radio was about 50 years old for the most part, licensed radio stations serving in the United States. I think of my grandparents. They were born around the year 1900, one grandfather born in 1899. And when they came along, they barely even saw the electric light bulb, and radio was just a fantasy out there somewhere. The telephone was just making its way across the United States and into people's homes. Electric lights and electric motors and the first automobiles. And my grandparents in their young 20s were introduced to the first radio stations broadcasting in the United States at that time. I never paid much attention to the history of radio until a little later in life as I studied how the medium has changed over the decades. It started out as a total information and entertainment source with variety programs and mysteries and comedies and dramas and even soap operas by the time you get to the 1930s and 1940s. Then television came along, and those programs moved gradually to television, and radio, which people predicted would die off, found a new life with the live announcer and music and formats to take you through your day. As I look back now, I said at the beginning of the program, quite often when I'm driving a long distance, I have satellite radio in my car. And I enjoy listening to Sirius XM channel 148, which is the golden age of radio channel. And I'm enjoying listening to programs that came out from before the time I was born, maybe in World War II, during the Depression. And even some programs I'll hear from the 1950s and realize that I was like 2, 3, and 4 years old when these programs were airing. I don't remember them then from that time. But radio has gone through a lot of changes as our entire technology base. In 100 years, in just a few years from now, radio as we've had it in the United States, broadcasting to homes, will be 100 years old in the not-too-distant future. And I've been in radio, when you think about it, when that time comes, I'm in radio now 46 years. And it won't be long before I will be marking my half-century in the broadcast medium. Half of the entire existence of radio, I will have had the opportunity to be part of something that never happened before in the history of mankind. And just as we had radio and then television, then satellite, then cable, and now internet, technology advances on. But what are we doing with this technology at our fingertips? Sometimes I wonder if we're really getting the best use out of the medium we have. When I was in college, I actually studied a little bit about the medium in the early 70s. And I remember there was a man by the name of Marshall McClure from Canada. And he was a commentator about all things media. And he talked about the medium of television and radio in particular. And he had this great line that a lot of people have been trying to dissect now since he said it way back in the 1960s, that the medium is the message. The medium is the message. And I to this day have really never got my own mind wrapped around the concept that the medium is the message. Maybe today I can get a better feel for what he was trying to express in an age when we only had newspaper, radio, and television on a daily basis. Today, with the internet and Facebook and all the associated news sources and video sources and YouTubes and what have you, the medium really is a message in and of itself, whichever platform you so desire to use. And what are we finding on these platforms? What are we gaining from these platforms? What are we learning from these platforms? I know that part of the human experience, I'll admit it. We like to have our downtime, our time away from our work, time away from the responsibilities of life. If you own a home, cutting the grass, or if you live up north, shoveling the snow, or if you live south of the equator, you have the same thing. But once again, you realize that we need some downtime. But I think that today, one of the problems with all the technology is maybe we have a little bit too much downtime. Now, what do I mean by that? When I came along, and I'm not trying to wax old and nostalgic per se. I mean, I admit it. And a lot of my audience is in my age bracket, and we share this common experience, for the most part, that as young people, we had certain expectations placed upon us. We were loved. We were cared for the most part. Of course, there's always exceptions, but for the most part, people that I knew came out of loving and close-knit families. And families had expectations of what their children should do. And all parents, even to this day, I would hope, at least back then, aspired that my generation would even have it better than their generation. As I told you, and as many of you would understand that are in your 50s, 60s, and 70s, that our parents, many of them came through some very tumultuous times. They didn't have it easy. They were born in a time that the nation was plunged into high unemployment, the Great Depression, and difficult times, and farmers going bankrupt. And we wondered, would we ever get everything back together again? And just as we see light at the end of the tunnel for a depression, we are plunged into a world war. So I think of my father in particular, being born during the Depression, and as he gets to his teens, finds himself on his way to the Pacific wearing the uniform of a United States Marine. And what a challenge that was for him. And you can understand that for him, coming home from that war, wanting to now finally build a life, the entire American dream of the house in the suburbs, maybe for some a house in the country, a good job in a city, whatever the case may be, backyard barbecues on the weekend. But we all had a certain amount of responsibility to our household. Everybody had their little job that they had to do, whether they liked it or not. If you lived in a fairly prosperous family, you might have had a automatic dishwasher. If not, you were part of the dishwashing squad after dinner at night, scrubbing pots and pans and cleaning up glassware and silverware and plates and bowls and drying them and putting them up in the cabinet. And even if you had a dishwasher back in the 60s, how many of our parents would wash the dishes before they put them in the dishwasher? I know my grandparents, I had one set of grandparents that lived well into their 90s in good health. And I remember when they were in their 80s, I replaced their dishwasher and put in a pretty decent one. And I kept trying to tell them, you don't have to wash the dishes before you put them in the dishwasher. But old habits are so hard to break, and it was for them as well. They still insisted on washing them, putting them in the dishwasher, running them overnight, and then putting them up the next morning. And that was the way they lived. I know for me, I had a certain amount of responsibility in my life. In the wintertime, I was part of the brigade that shoveled out our driveway and our walkway when the snows came in upstate New York. When the spring came, it was time to clean up the yard of debris and rake and prepare. And then when the grass began to grow, to keep it cut and keep the weeds at bay. And I never thought much about it. Did I really like it? No, of course I could have found things that I would have far preferred doing. But before I could do the things that I wanted to do, I needed to do the things I was needed to do. And those things were not so much just manual labor chores as they were a life-teaching experience. You learn to be responsible because, see, someday when you have your own home, you're going to have to make sure that the mortgage is paid, the insurance is taken care of, taxes are paid, lawn maintained, bad plumbing is fixed, whatever the case may be. You take responsibility for the things you need to do. And today, I'm just so concerned. About a month ago, there was a story about a guy that's 30 years old in a community near Syracuse, New York. I know the area quite well. And here's a guy that's 30 years of age, and they talk about this syndrome now called failure to launch. Failure to launch. And that is being applied to many that are around 20 to 30, 32 years of age that just can't seem to get their life together. And I've met a lot of them that are still living at home, living on the edge, living for the moment. They can't hold a job. They expect the job to accommodate them rather than give their time in exchange for a paycheck to do the work that needs to be done. And they have a hard time taking on responsibility. They don't know how to balance a checkbook. They live today for the moment in such a way they live for the moment and never think about the needs of next week. If they get a paycheck for so many dollars, they will spend it going out on the town, going out to a movie, buying some toy or something that they want, and never thinking about the power bill that would be coming due or the rent check that's needed. I'm not saying all, but there seems to be a higher percentage today. There seems to be a significantly higher percentage today of young people that do not have the basic life skills that my generation, my father's generation, and my grandparents' generation had to be able to start out in life. I was 17, not quite 18, when I left home to pay my own way and work through school, to learn the electronics trade and continue in broadcast. It meant that I had to carefully budget what little money I was making to make sure that my school bill was up to date. Otherwise, I would be out of school. To make sure that the rent was paid for the room that I leased, or I would have no place to sleep. And to spend carefully the money I had to buy food and make sure there's enough for gas and all the necessities each and every week. And I find people today that are approaching 30, even 35 years of age that find it almost impossible for them to do. Some do, but far too many of my generation indulged our kids. Not all. They tried to make their life like our parents did better, but they forgot one ingredient. They forgot one major ingredient, and that ingredient is responsibility and learning. And you learn from your mistakes. You learn by doing things over and over again. When I started out learning some of the basic techniques of my industry, I didn't know how to do it coming out of the starting gate. I had to learn. I had to practice. I had to put effort and time in. You just don't automatically qualify for a high-paying job. In the radio business, you're either good at what you do or you're not. You have the talent or you don't. And nowadays, people have expectations because they want something. They believe they're entitled to have that in their life. You know, I know a young teenager that has this goal for life, but doesn't understand the amount of work and commitment that goal is going to take to ever accomplish what they want to do. And it's sad. They think that somehow when they graduate high school, if they graduate, they don't care about their grades. They don't seem to, a lot of them just don't care. And they spend their times attached to an electronic device for hours. Not one or two, but in many cases, 9 and 10 hours a day, even on a school day, attached to an electronic device, living in a virtual world and totally unprepared for the realities of life, thinking that maybe they could design the next video game. Maybe they can be a character in some kind of animation and do the voice work. Not realizing how few jobs there are for the few of those productions actually made, and the amount of work, effort, practice that it takes to ever get near a goal of that nature. And also learning how to do something I learned at a young age called networking. Sometimes sometimes, and I think you that are my age will understand this, it's not necessarily what you know, it's who you know that can be the door opener for you to get that great job. You know, I had that happen to me way back when I was moving into the engineering side. And I knew it would be a better income and a better career. And I thought it would take me at least a decade to get to a larger radio market. I thought I'd be spending a lot of time in the smaller markets just to have the years experience under my belt. I had worked extremely hard for a number of years, about 7 years, to have a good and solid background. And I knew that I could handle the responsibility of a major market radio station, but I didn't have the number of years yet in a smaller market. And then, once again, that who you know comes into play. And somebody said, I know of a radio station hiring. I can put in a good word because you do an above average job, and I think you could pull this one off. And through that connection, I had the interview, and yes, I did get that job. But still, prior to getting that job in a major market that many have to wait a decade or two to get, I was fortunate because I did put in the work and the effort. It wasn't just a dream. It was a dream backed up by work. It was a dream backed up by doing and putting in the long hours and not complaining. I wasn't a clock watcher. When I went to work, I didn't get there at the last minute and leave right before 5 o'clock or whatever the quitting time was. I tended to get to work early, especially in my on-air days when I was a radio announcer. Even though I was not paid to be there early, I got there early. So when the time came to be on the air, I was prepared and I was ready to do the job they were paying me to do because I knew if I did a good job, I get to keep the job. And if I do a good job, maybe at some point I can go move up the ladder to a better and higher paying job. The expectations today are all too often they want it all coming out of the starting gate, and they're so unprepared. You know, even back when I was in high school, and this seems like, 50 years ago, almost, not quite, we're getting there, 46 years now since I graduated from high school, 46 years this year since I graduated high school. We were given the tools for life as part of our educational experience. I knew how to balance a checkbook. I knew how to budget. I even was in a prototype class to teach young men how to cook for themselves and take care of basic things at home like laundry. And how many of our kids today even have the ability to do that? I think of that 30-year-old that I talked about that his parents, had to go to court to get him out of the house. He had left home for a short time and failed at life and has been living back at home for 8 years, virtually unemployed, having his laundry done, his meals made, his room cleaned for him. And he talks about these great dreams that he has, but he has no skills in life, no determination, no effort. He's waiting for life to hand him a living. He's waiting for life to give him something for free. And it's not happening, so he stays at home. And today they have a name for it. It's called failure to launch. And as every year has been going by for the last not quite 10 years, there seems to be more and more people in their 30s still living at home, where when I was 20, it was unheard of. Virtually only in the rarest of circumstances where parents needed extensive care from extended family did people even consider staying at home beyond the age of somewhere in their early 20s. And now we have people that are 30, 35, and pushing toward even 40 that have failed to launch and take responsibility for their own lives. And worse in my opinion, when I look back at the old days, they don't want to stand by their commitments. They don't want to be committed. And that is not just for that generation. I'm seeing that occur even in the older generation. Walking away from commitments so easily, not willing to make commitments, not willing to take any kind of a risk, and not willing to pledge themselves to a good cause. They live for the moment and never look at the big picture, and that is so sad. This is your weekend show, and I'm your host, Bob Biermann. I'm so glad that you're taking time to be with me today. Once again, the website is yourweekendshow.com. That is yourweekendshow.com. When we come back, we'll wrap up this week's program.
Grandpa, tell me about the good old days. Sometimes it feels like this world's gone crazy. Grandpa, take me back to yesterday, when the line between right and wrong didn't seem so hazy. Did lovers really fall in love to stay, stand beside each other, come what may? Promise really something people kept, not just something they would say. Families really bow their heads to pray. Daddies really never go away. Oh, oh, Grandpa, tell me about the good old days. Everything is changing fast. We call it progress, but I just don't know. And Grandpa, let's wander back into the past, then paint me the picture of long ago. Lovers really fall in love to stay, stand beside each other, come what may. Promise really something people kept, not just something they would say and then forget. Families really bow their heads to pray. Daddies really never go away. Tell me about the good old days. Whoa, whoa, Grandpa, tell me about the good old days.
It is so hard to believe another weekend is just about come and gone for this week. I want to thank you for taking the time to listen. I hope you enjoyed that rendition of the song, Grandpa, Tell Me About the Good Old Days by the Judds. And maybe it made you think about some of the good old days. Maybe we need to bring back some of the responsibility and integrity and expectations that we had for the generations before. And maybe that is one of the greatest hopes we can have for our future on this planet. I want to remind you about the website, yourweekendshow.com. That is yourweekendshow.com. Would you take some time, visit the webpage, and let me know that you listen? We're also on Facebook. Simply look for Your Weekend Show. Make it one word, Your Weekend Show. And this is Bob Biermann reminding you to join us next week. And until then, may God richly bless you.